Is Steve Chalke from the Oasis Trust, who has a great deal to say about these kinds of things. Steve, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're in a mess as a country. We're facing a huge crisis. How do you see the situation?
I see the tragedy of it every day. We run over 50 schools around England, young children, older children, huge numbers of staff who are struggling, working with parents, tens of thousands of parents, not just through our schools, but through our community work and our churches. So you see the struggle of this absolutely every day. One of our head teachers wrote to me just last Friday, I think it was, and she told me the story of a 7-year-old boy that she took home because he was ill, and she discovered that he'd not eaten for 2 days. She took him home and discovered that the whole family hadn't eaten for 2 days, that they were all unwell. And she said to me, she said, "Steve, I bought them enough food for a week and all the sanitary materials they needed as well for a week." And then she said to me in her letter, "But Steve, he's just one and we've got many." Yeah. And that's just in one school. So see the pain of the thing all the time. I'm an activist, you know, and Oasis, the charity I began, is an activist organisation. So I think it then becomes our responsibility, our God-given responsibility. You know, I always say Jesus wasn't an Anglican. Do you know how I know how he wasn't?
How is he not an Anglican?
Because I always say Jesus only ever taught his followers one prayer. If he'd have been an Anglican, he'd have had 2 for every day of the year, wouldn't he? So one prayer. And it's, as you know, he said, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come on earth." So I'm always driven back to how do we build God's kingship on earth in this crisis?
Some people would say, you know, it's not our business to be getting involved in this. We should be saying our prayers, singing our hymns. We should be they're loyal to God. But actually, this is politics. You're playing politics here, aren't you? That's what I said. What's your response?
Well, many years ago, I read one of Tom Wright's books. You know, good Anglican bishop, as you know, great New Testament scholar and thinker. It was the first book I'd ever read that Tom had written, and I think it was called The Challenge of Jesus. And I read this on holiday, and I remember in the first few pages, Tom made this point. He said, "We've come to believe that Jesus was a preacher and a religious leader. He wasn't a preacher, he was a politician." That's what Tom said. And a politician with a small p, an activist, someone who did things, shocking things, provocative things. He did things. He was on the side of all of those who didn't count in society. And then Tom said, and sometimes he stopped to comment, and sometimes he stopped to answer questions or tell a story, but he did things. And it was doing those things that got him into trouble with the religious leaders who believed that their religion demanded something different of them. So I've carried that understanding through my life. I think when I first became a Christian, when I was 14, I couldn't have articulated it the way that Tom did there, but I knew that prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth.
So to be a follower of Jesus means doing things as Jesus did. That's great to hear. There are some Christians, I think, who will feel really powerless at the moment. They'll feel the problems we face are just too acute. Are they?
I think I understand that feeling. I think there are things that we can do together and things that we should do together. I think there are things we can do as the church. I think there are things we can do as churches. And I think there are things that we can do as individuals. And I think also that what we discovered through COVID is a more tender side of being human. You know, people went next door. They did shopping for their next door neighbours. They put something extra into that shopping. They checked up on one another. And I think that sadly, we've lost already some of that. So it's about how we get things back. So I can take action for the person that lives next to me or lives across the road from me.
Yeah.
Or I can check up on how my cousin's doing, in my case, or my sister's doing, how she's coping. I can do all of those things. My sister is a single parent with 2 children. I am my sister's keeper. I am responsible. I think all of that, I can do that at a personal level. I think as we organise ourselves together, there's all sorts of things we do. And I know that you're planning some really great initiatives through churches across Wales. A story here from the church that I'm one of the leaders of still. When I've been part of this church for 20 years, and I was the leader of it. And a young woman called Jo arrived in our church about 12 years ago. And Jo said to me just before Christmas one year, she said, why don't we gather some baskets of food? She said, you know that kind of buy one, get one free thing?
Yeah.
She said, well, why don't we ask people to bring the one they get free to put into some baskets? And then why don't you, Steve, arrange with the little local primary school next to our church to supply those baskets of food to families in need? So I said, great idea, Jo. And I think it was 5 baskets we got together, and we took them to the primary school and we gave them, and their families loved them, and the school loved them. And the next year we did a few more. Well, here's the end of the story. Well, it's not the end of the story where we are now. Those baskets of food have grown into what we now call the Waterloo Food Bank. We work with all of the churches and both of the cathedrals. We got an Anglican cathedral and a Catholic cathedral in the area.
Yeah.
In the last 6 months, we still run the core business, but supply them with all the resources they need to run their own little outlets, hubs of the food bank. In the last 6 months together, we've shifted 100 tons of food. In the last 6 months, we've fed just over 12,500 and something people with food. We've done all of those things. And guess what? The little local primary school that we took those 5 baskets of food to, in the end, they said, can we be more involved with Oasis? And the school's now called Oasis Academy Johanna. So the school's become part of Oasis. There are almost 100 businesses in the area that work with us, besides the GPs, the 2 hospitals in the area, all of the churches. Everyone works together, and it's all because Jo had the idea of, hey Steve, why don't we gather 5? Well, it wasn't, some baskets of food. It turned out to be 5. A bit like the feeding of the 5.
I was going to say, there's a biblical precedent here, isn't there? Yeah, baskets. So that's great. So you've told me a little bit about doing things individually. Dewi Sant, our saint in Wales, talked about doing the little things, but we can do lots of little things together, which become big things.
Yeah. And of course that springs out of the story of the feeding of the 5,000 people. It wasn't just 5,000 people, it was 5,000 men and women and children. But I don't know if you know this, where it's traditionally believed that miracle happened, that extraordinary event took place, they built a church. Soon after, I think within a couple of 100 years of Jesus' life, and it's still there. I think they rebuilt it several times. It's on the side of the Sea of Galilee, and the church is called the Church of the Multiplication. And I think that's amazing, because it's when we bring what we've got that this great multiplication happens, like that unknown little child brought his lunch. So when we work together, Andrew, I think extraordinary things are possible. So what we're doing around Oasis World, we work in 40-something communities, 42 communities around England, where we've got schools or churches or sometimes both, or community centres or whatever they are. But we've come up with an idea for this time, which we call the living room. Instead of running a warm bank or whatever, We just have opened up the resource that we've got. So it's different everywhere. Sometimes we've got a community hall, sometimes we use a room in a church, sometimes we use a room in a school, sometimes and instead of saying here's a warm bank, if you're cold and you can't heat your house, come in, all we're doing is putting on events. So we, on Monday night in our little living room here, we put on an event, and I asked the local MP along, and we talked about the struggle for young people, actually, because life's a struggle for young people. Over 100 people came to the event.
That's great.
Yeah, but they don't have to say I'm here because I wanted to keep warm. Some did, some didn't. They're just there. So that's one of the things we're doing.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the Church in Wales has launched its own kind of initiative to try and, in many ways, learn from others and see if we can also make a difference. And we've called it Food and Fuel in Welsh, Bwyd a Thanwydd. What would you say to encourage us that this is a struggle worth pursuing? It's something worth doing.
I think it's not just a struggle worth pursuing. I think it's our DNA. I think it's who we are. I think it's what Christ calls us to do. When you did this for the least of these, you do it for me. Where do we find God? We find God in disguise in others. Jesus said it. When you do it for the least of these, you do it for me. Yeah. If you want a real encounter with Christ and God's Spirit in your life, serve others. That's what Jesus was saying. You'll find me as you serve. So this is the kernel. This is the DNA. This is the hub of our faith. It's the actions that make us Christ followers. A friend of mine who's a vicar tells me, his name's Dave, and he tells me a story about a woman who came to join his church just a few years ago, but she didn't come from a Christian background at all. And he was there one day when some of her friends said to her, well, are you a Christian now then? And she had this brilliant response. She said, well, I don't know. That's for you to decide, not me. See, so she got it. It's the way I live. That's what tells you whether I'm a follower of Jesus or not. When you do it for the least of these, you do it for me. And as you say, we're starting to do small things individually which produce great fruit, and together we can do more. Remember Joe and those 5 baskets of food, which now have led to an Oasis school and this huge thing, the Waterloo Food Bank, that involves hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people.
I'll remember Joe. I'll remember it in our DNA. Steve Chalke, it's been great to talk to you again. Thanks for giving us your time, Steve.
Thank you.
God bless.